March 15, 1939, Prague. The sound of engines echoes through the former capital of Czechoslovakia as German columns roll past the silent crowds. Tanks and trucks carry soldiers in gray uniforms, their boots striking the cobblestones of a city that only months earlier had been the heart of a proud democracy. Swastikas flutter above Prague, and the new protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia is proclaimed. The German armed forces, the Wehrmacht, swiftly occupies every corner of the country. In the streets, people watch in disbelief. Some cry. Some stare in silence, and others lower their heads and walk away. The independent Czechoslovakia, born from the hopes of 1918, ceases to exist, and with it disappears the Czechoslovak army, left without a country to defend, though many of its soldiers will later escape abroad to fight again under foreign skies, joining also the Royal Air Force in Britain and earning honor in the Battle of Britain. But not all choose the path of courage. Among them is a young pilot whose loyalty will fail. A man who will one day betray his friends, his country, and the cause of freedom itself. His name is Augustin Přeučil. Augustin Přeučil was born on July 3, 1914 in the small village of Trebčan in central Bohemia, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His parents were modest people. His father, Augustin, was a butcher, and his mother, Marie, cared for the household. The First World War and the collapse of Austria-Hungary in 1918 changed a great deal in the region. Czechoslovakia was created as a new state, and the ideals of freedom and progress shaped the ambitions of its younger generation. Aviation was especially admired, seen as a field of modern technology and national pride. Přeučil was among those drawn to this calling, took a 3-month civilian pilot course, and later entered the Czechoslovak Air Force. Přeučil gained experience flying military aircraft and was considered capable, though not an outstanding pilot. He was ambitious, and like many of his peers, he expected to have a long career in the service of his country. Everything changed when the Munich Agreement of September 1938 forced the Republic to give up the Sudetenland to Germany. In March the following year, the Wehrmacht marched into Prague, and what was left of Czechoslovakia ceased to exist. The Czech and Moravian lands became the protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia under German control, and for officers like Přeučil, the army was dissolved, and their future was uncertain. While some accepted new jobs under German supervision, others decided to resist by leaving the country and continuing the struggle abroad. At this time, Augustin Přeučil was considering what to do in this new situation. His first idea was to send an application to join the Luftwaffe, German Air Force, but he was rejected. In the months after the occupation, while Přeučil was applying to the Luftwaffe, thousands of Czechoslovak soldiers, pilots, and civilians crossed borders illegally into Poland or Hungary, hoping to reach France or Britain. They joined exile forces that aimed to restore their nation. Surprisingly, and in contrast with his earlier intentions, Přeučil was among those who seemed to take this path. He left occupied Bohemia and made his way into exile. To his comrades, he seemed determined to continue the fight against the Nazis. But in truth, he was already compromised. The Gestapo, the German secret state police, had approached him after a failed attempt to flee the country, and he became a Gestapo agent in the summer of 1939. He then went into exile again. This time to Poland, where he infiltrated the forming Czechoslovak units and sent information about them to the Protectorate by post. He later left with the unit for France and, after its defeat, for Great Britain, where he went through several units within the British Royal Air Force, the RAF, received generally negative evaluations, and eventually ended up at a training unit, where he worked as an instructor for new pilots. During his stay in Great Britain, He got engaged and subsequently married 19-year-old Muriel Graham Kirby, whose parents had to give their consent to the marriage due to her young age. At first glance, Preuchil appeared to be merely a problematic foreign pilot, but in reality, he was still a Gestapo agent. It was on the orders of the Gestapo that on September 18, 1941, during a training flight while instructing a student pilot in a second aircraft, he deserted by claiming problems with the aircraft and then diving sharply from a great height down to sea level, where he leveled off and flew over Belgium at low altitude, below German radar, a step intended to prevent the Germans from accidentally shooting him down as an approaching Allied aircraft on a combat mission. His flight was detected by a German anti-aircraft battery located on the Belgian coast, and Preuchil then made an emergency landing in occupied Belgium. The locals tried to help him escape, but Preuchil took a step that should have been a warning to them. He did not try to escape from the Germans or destroy the plane. On the contrary, after the Germans arrived, he informed on the aforementioned locals that had tried to help him. At the time of Preuchil's disappearance, the RAF assumed he had crashed and died at sea. It was not until the Belgian resistance reported to London the incident of his arrival in their territory, and his behavior, which had cost the lives of 2 Belgians who had been executed by the Gestapo, that the true circumstances of his disappearance became apparent to the British authorities. Meanwhile, in Britain, his young wife mourned his loss, believing him to be another victim of the air war, although it is likely that his marriage to her was a cover for his role as an agent working for the Gestapo and Nazi Germany. His wife even received a widow's pension during the war, and for a time it was considered that Preuchil would be awarded the Czechoslovak War Cross 1939 in memoriam, probably thanks to information from the Belgian resistance about the pilot's strange behavior after the alleged emergency landing. This never happened. His wife mourned him for several years, and after the war, she learned, to her shock, that her husband had survived and would be tried as a Gestapo agent. The reason the traitor and Gestapo agent Augustin Preuchil decided to fly from Great Britain to Nazi-occupied territory was that he believed he was flying the most modern type of fighter plane, the Hawker Hurricane, and thought that the Germans had no information about it and that the opportunity to examine the new aircraft would give them a strategic advantage. However, Preuchil was mistaken and brought the Germans an older type of this fighter plane, about which they already had information. Preuchil's knowledge of RAF procedures, exile organizations, and escape routes made him a valuable tool. Preuchil provided the Prague Gestapo with a series of detailed reports on foreign air forces and their personnel, for which he was rewarded with 10,000 Reichsmarks, an equivalent of more than $95,000 today. He continued to work for the Gestapo, targeting the domestic resistance with provocations. For example, he was sent to a Gestapo prison in the small fortress in Terezin as a fake prisoner. There he was tasked with obtaining information from the prisoners, and he also participated in the interrogation of captured Czechoslovak airmen who had been taken to Prague. As a Gestapo agent, he collaborated with Karel Průcha and William Jarek, 2 Czechoslovak agents who betrayed their country and collaborated with the Gestapo. It was Preuchil who reported Jarek for his weak cooperation. Preuchil's denunciation of Jarek helped to expose Jarek's efforts to establish contact with the home resistance, and this former agent was arrested and deported to the Dachau concentration camp. Preuchil was again rewarded by the Gestapo for his activities. One reason for his collaboration with the Gestapo could have been unreturned love and a murder. Before the war, in his native village of Trebsin, he fell in love with a local girl, Maruska Jaroskova, but she did not share his feelings, and one day she was found dead. Although her death remains unexplained to this day, one theory claims that Preuchil killed her. His alleged accomplice, who was supposed to help him dispose of the body in the river. to make it appear a suicide, confessed to the crime on his deathbed. It is therefore possible that the Gestapo learned of the murder and used it to force Preußel into cooperation. By 1944, the war was turning decisively against Germany. As the Allies landed in Normandy and the Red Army advanced from the east, resistance movements across occupied Europe gained new strength. Preußel's usefulness declined, but he continued to serve the Gestapo until the final days. In May 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered, and for collaborators across Europe, the end of the war marked the beginning of reckoning. Even though Preußel tried to hide his past, his actions were too well known, and on May 19, 1945, 11 days after the fall of Nazi Germany, Preußel was arrested in Prague as a known Gestapo agent. He was first tried by a military court, but his case was referred to the Civilian People's Court in Prague, which also dealt with former Gestapo agents and Nazi collaborators. The state of the Czechoslovak judiciary in the post-war period is illustrated by the fact that Augustin Preußel, a man who left behind only destruction and the dead bodies of resistance fighters, testified in court in the cases of William Jarek and Karel Průcha. 2. This day, it remains unclear what game Preußel was playing during this period and whether he was attempting to exchange his testimony in court for a lesser sentence for his crimes. The trial of Augustin Preußel took place in Prague on April 14, 1947. The charges were grave: high treason, espionage, desertion, and complicity in the deaths of resistance members and civilians. Despite the fact that Preußel's defense attorney claimed, among other things, that his client was mentally ill, this strategy did not help. The proceedings lasted only a few hours and concluded that same day, on April 14, 1947, with a death sentence. That very day the 32-year-old Augustin Preußel was hanged in Pankrak prison in Prague.